says, to speak of the intolerance of tolerance might strike some people as nothing more than an errant nonsense, an obscure oxymoron, perhaps, as meaningless as talk about the hotness of coal or the blackness of white. Tolerance currently occupies a very high place in Western culture, a bit like motherhood and apple pie in America in the early 1950s. It is considered rather degage to question it, to hint, as my title does, that this tolerance might itself, on occasion, be intolerant, is unlikely to win many friends. To put the matter in a slightly more sophisticated, I can't say that word, sophisticated way, tolerance has become part of the Western plausibility structure. As far as I know, the expression plausibility structure was coined by sociologist Peter L. Berger, and he uses it to refer to structures of thought widely and almost unquestionably accepted throughout a particular culture. One of his departure arguments is that in tight monolithic cultures, Japan, the resonating plausible structures may be enormously complex. That is, there may be many interlocking stances that are widely assumed and almost never questioned. By contrast, in a highly diverse culture, like what dominates many nations in the Western world, the plausibility structures are necessary, more restricted for the very good reason that there are fewer stances held in common. The plausibility structures that do remain, however, tend to be held with extra tenacity, almost as if people recognize that without such structures, the culture would be in danger of flying apart. Intolerance, I'm suggesting, is, in much of the Western world, part of this restricted but tenaciously held philosophy structure. To saunter into the public square and question it in some way or other, not only is it to tilt at windmills, but is also currently colletry insensitive, lacking in good taste, boorish. But I press on regardless, persuaded that the emperor has no clothes, or at best is sporting no more than jock and shorts. The notion of tolerance is changing, and with the new definitions, the shape of tolerance itself has changed. Although a few things can be said in favor of the new definition, the sad reality is that the new complementary tolerance is intrinsically intolerant. It is blind to its own shortcomings because it erroneously thinks it holds the moral high ground. It cannot be questioned because it has become part of the West's plausibility structure. And worse, this new tolerance is socially dangerous and is certainly intellectually debilitating. Even the good that it wishes to achieve is better accomplished in other ways. And most of the rest of this chapter is devoted to unpacking and defending this thesis. The old tolerance and the new tolerance. So let's begin with the dictionaries in the Oxford English Dictionary. The first meaning of the verb to tolerate is to endure, sustain pain or hardship. That usage is becoming obsolete, but it still surfaces today when we say that a patient has a remarkable ability to tolerate pain. The second meaning is to allow to exist or to be done or practiced without authoritative interference or molestation. Also, gen, to allow, permit. Third, to bear without repugnance, to allow intellectually or in taste, sentiment, or principle to put up with. The Webster Dictionary is similar: to allow, permit, to not interfere with, to recognize and respect others' beliefs, practices, etc., without necessarily agreeing or sympathizing. To put up with the bear as he tolerates his brother-in-law. In medicine, to have tolerance for a specific drug, etc. Even a computer-based dictionary includes in its list acceptance. Accept is the sense of different views, to recognize other people's right to have a different belief or practices without an attempt to suppress them. So far, so good. All these definitions are on the same page, and when we turn to the Carter's treatment of the corresponding noun tolerance, however, a subtle change appears. Accepting of different views. The accepting of different views of other people in religious or political matters, and fairness toward the people who hold these different views. The shift from accepting the existence of different views to acceptance of different views, from recognizing other people's right to have different beliefs or practices to accepting the different views of other people, is subtle in form, but massive in substance. To accept that a different or a potion exists and deserves the right to exist is one thing. To accept that potion itself means that one is no longer opposing it. The new tolerance suggests that actually accepting another potion means believing that the potion to be true, or at least as true as your own, and we move from allowing the free expression of contrary opinions to the acceptance of all opinions. We leave from permitting the articulation of beliefs and claims with which we do not agree to ascertain that all beliefs and claims are equally valid. Thus, we slide from the old tolerance to the new. And the problem of what tolerance means is in fact more difficult than these few comments on dictionary entries might suggest. For in complementary uses, both meanings continue in popular use, and often it is unclear what the speaker or writer means. For instance, she is a very tolerant person. Does this mean she gladly puts up with a lot of opinions with which she disagrees, or that she thinks all opinions are equally valid? A Muslim cleric says, "We do not tolerate other religions." Does this mean that, according to this cleric, Muslims do not think that other religions should be permitted to exist, or that Muslims cannot agree with the other religions are as valid as Islam? A Christian pastor declares, "Christians gladly tolerate other religions." Does this mean, according to this pastor, that Christians gladly insist that other religions have as much right to exist as Christianity does, or that Christianity gladly asserts that all religions are equally valid? "You Christians are so intolerant," someone asserts. Does this mean that Christians wish all potions contrary to their own were expropriated, or that Christians insist that Jesus is the only way to God? The former is patiently untrue. The latter is certainly true. At least, if Christians are trying to be faithful to the Bible, Christians do think that Jesus is the only way to God. But that does not make them intolerant. But does that make them intolerant? In the former sense of intolerant, not at all. The fact remains, however, that any sort of exclusive truth claim is widely viewed as a sign of gross intolerance. But the latter depends absolutely on the second meaning of tolerance. Other dissertations can be usefully introduced. Go back to the dissertation, "Christians gladly tolerate other religions," and let us assume for a moment that the first meaning of tolerate is in view. Christians gladly insist that other religions have as much right to exist as their own. However, much those same Christians may think the other religions are deeply mistaken in some respects. Even this more classical understanding of intolerance leaves room for a certain amount of ranges. Does the statement evidence legal tolerance? In that case, it is affirming that Christians gladly fight for the equal standing before the law of all religious minorities. Of course, from a Christian perspective, this is a temporary arrangement that lasts only until Christ returns. It is a way of saying that in this fallen, broken world, order in this time of massive idolatry, in this age of theological and religious confusion, God has so ordered things that conflict, idolatry, confrontation, and wildly disparate systems of thought, even about God Himself, persist. In the new heaven and new earth, God's desires will not be contested, but will be object of worship and delight for the time being. In the new heaven and new earth, God's desires will not be contested with worldly object, a worship delight. For the time being, however, Caesar, government, has the responsibility to preserve social order in a chaotic world. Although Caesar remains under God's providential sovereignty, nevertheless, there is a difference between God and Caesar. In Jesus Himself, in a chaotic world, also Caesar remains under God's providential sovereignty. Nevertheless, there is a difference between God and Caesar, and Jesus Himself has told us to render to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's. And what is God's? It is will. It will not be like that in the new heaven and the new earth. Thus, even the legal tolerance, which Christians should surely defend, belongs to the present, to the time when the kingdom of God has dawned, but has not yet been consumed. It's so weird. That was fast. I don't know, it's weird. Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's. It will not be like that in a new heaven and new earth. Thus, even this legal tolerance, which Christians should surely defend, belongs to the present, to the time when the kingdom of God has dawned, but has not yet been consummated, or to say it the way theologians do, to this age of inarticulation, but yet final eschatologically. Of course, in the right context, the same sentence, Christians gladly tolerate other religions, might suggest not illegal tolerance, but social tolerance. That is, in a multicultural society, people of different religions should mix together without sights. And condescensions for all people have been made in the image of God, and all will give an account to him on the last day. Of all people, Christians ought to know that they are not one was socially superior to others. They talk about a great Savior, but they are not to think of themselves as great people. So social tolerance should be encouraged. Yet another destination demands brief mention. Someone might assert that the God of the Bible, even under the terms of the new covenant, does not hold up tolerance as a virtue. If men and women do not repent and by conversion come under the lordship of Christ, they perish. Certainly the God of the Bible does not hold up tolerance in the second sense as a virtue. Yet it is not God's patience and forbearance in delaying Christ's return, a form of tolerance intended to lead people to repentance. Romans chapter 2 verse 4. Hence the distinction, bad ideas and actions are tolerated in the first sense, reluctantly and with bold articulation of what makes them bad, while the people who hold those bad ideas or perform those bad actions are tolerated again in the first sense, without any sense of begrudging reluctance, but in the hope that they will come to repentance and faith. Tolerance toward persons, in a sense, is surely a great virtue to be nurtured and cultivated. These and other distinctions need to be thought through a little more, and they will be picked up and later in this book. At the moment, it is more urgent to explore more fully how wildly different the old tolerance and the new tolerance really are. The sharpening contrast of the old tolerance and the new. Under the old view of tolerance, a person might be judged tolerant if, while holding strong views, he or she is insisted that others had the right to distinct from those views and argue their own cases. And this view of tolerance is in line with the famous otherness, often erroneously assigned to Roger. I disapprove of what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. This older view of tolerance makes free exceptions. There's objective truth there's objective truth out there, and it is our duty to pursue that truth. The various parties in a dispute think that they know what the truth of the matter is, even though they disagree sharply, each party thinking the other is wrong. Nevertheless, they hold the best chance of uncovering the truth of the matter, or the best chance of persuading most people with the reasoning and not with corroboration, is by the unhindered exchange of ideas. No matter how wrong-headed some of those ideas seem, this third assumption demands that all sides insist that their opponents must not be silenced or crushed. Free energy may eventually bring the truth out. It is likely to convince the greatest number of people. Philogos and the imaginary substance like comets once fought to cause combustion will be opposed and auction will win. Newton's mechanics would be best, and Einstein's relativity and quantum mechanics will both have their say. One version of this older version of tolerance, one might call it the secular libertation version, has another wrinkle to it. In his famous text on liberty, John Stuart Mill obscures secular spaces to tolerance in the domain of religion. Mill argues there are insufficient rational grounds for verifying the true claims of any religion. The only reasonable stance toward religion is therefore public agnosticism and private benign tolerance. For Mill, people should be tolerant in the domain of religion, not because this is the best way to uncover the truth, but precisely because whatever the truth, there are insufficient means for uncoverment. This is the long introduction. I thought the book was one. A parable made famous by a slightly earlier thinker, Gotthold Ephraim Lessing, nicely illustrates this perceptive. Lessing starts the parable in the 12th century during the First Crusade. The setting is critical to understanding what Lessing was trying to establish by his parable, and the setting is a conversation among three characters, each of whom represents one of the world's three monotheistic religions: the Sultan, the Muslim Sultan, Nathan the Wise, a Jew and a Christian knight. Templar Solomon says to Nathan, "You are so wise. Now tell me, I entreat what human faith, what theological law?" Okay. Have struck you as true is the best. Instead of answering directly, Nathan tells his parable. A man owned an opal ring of superiority and extraordinary, not to say magical powers. Whoever wore it was beloved by God and by human beings. He had received it from his father, who had received it from his. And so on, it had been passed down from generation to generation from time immemorial. The man with the ring had 3 sons, each of whom he loved equally, and to each whom he promised at one time or another that he would give the ring. Approaching death, the man realized, of course, that he could not make good on his promise. So he secretly asked a master jeweler to make the 2 perfect copies of the ring. The jeweler did such a magnificent job that the rings were physically indistinguishable, even though only one had the magical powers. Now on his deathbed, the man called each of his sons individually to his side and gave him a ring. And the man died, and only then did the sons discover that each of the sons had a ring, and they began to argue about which one that possessed the original magic ring. In a play, Nathan the Wise describes their bickering comments. I really want to get to the main part. I don't want to read this. The brothers investigate, recriminate, and wrangle all in vain, which was the true original genuine ring was undemonstrable almost as much as now by us is undemonstrable. The one true faith, wanting to resolve their dispute, the brothers ask a wise judge to settle the issue, but his ruling refuses to discriminate. If each of you in truth receive his ring straight from his father's hand, let each believe his own to be the true and genuine ring. The judge urges that the brothers to abandon their quest to determine which ring is the magic original. Each brother should instead accept his ring as if it were the original, and in that conviction live a life of moral goodness. This would bring honor both to their father and to God. Lessing parable resonated with his 18th century Enlightenment readers. The three great monotheistic religions were so similar that each group should happily go on thinking that their religion was the true one and focus on the lives of virtue and goodness, free of nasty dogmatism. The dogmatism that was blamed for the bloody wars of the previous century. What was called for, in other words, was religious tolerance. There is no harm in believing that your monotheistic religion is the best, provided you live a good life and let others think that their religion is best. The small wonder the parable retains its appeal to readers in the 21st century. People today are no less skeptical about claims to exclusive religious truth than there were Lessing readers, and they were being inclined to think well of a religion. It produces morally respectful and religiously tolerant adherents. Today, of course, the parable would have to be revised instead of 3 rings. We would need dozens of them, if not hundreds, to symbolize the mutual acceptability of the many religious options, whether monotheistic, polytheistic, or non-theistic. And of course, we could not concede today, as Leeson could, that one of the rings really is the original. In some ways, of course, the Lessing's parable is not very satisfying. To make the parable work, at least 3 rather religious, ridiculous stances have been incorporated into the story. Number 1, the God figure. In the parable, the man with the magic ring foolishly promises the ring to each of his 3 sons, even though he knows full well he cannot make good on his multiple promises. Far from loving his 3 sons equally, he is presented as a weak fool who makes impossible promises. This is not an incidental detail in the story. It is an essential component that sets out why the father goes to the trouble of deceiving at least 2 of his sons with fake rings. So has God made it impossible, mutually conflicting promises to his desperate sons, ostensibly loving all of them so much he ends up lying to them. 2, the entire parable presupposes that we the readers know what God has done, far from fostering a Bayesian tolerance on the ground that we cannot know which ring is the original. This tolerance is in reality grounded in the dogmatic certainty that God himself has produced fake rings because he cannot bear to disappoint. Any of his sons. In other words, the story works only because the reader has the outsider knowledge of what God has done, far from advocating a certain kind of epistemological restraint ground in our ignorance of what God is like. The parable assumes the reader knows exactly what God is like. He is the kind of father who happily creates counterfeit rings to keep his boys happy in the dark. Number 3, equal plausible is the story is that way in which the fake rings are physically indistinguishable from the genuine original, yet lack individual powers. If over time the original does not produce the cyclical blessings, owing to its magical properties, its magic is so weak to be irrelevant. The counterfeits, in other words, are not only good copies physically, but they seem to work as well as the original provided each son thinks the copy is original. In other words, we are taken away from a powerful religion that actually transforms people to multiple religions, where it does not matter all that much where one of them is truly powerful or not. What matters is that its defenders think it is powerful. The same problem faces the account of the dialogue between Timothy and the Muslim, the Caliph of Baghdad, about AD 800, an account that Philip Jenkins was made popular. Consider the story told by Timothy, a patriarch of the Nestorian church around 800. He engaged in a famous debate with a Muslim. Caliphate, I don't know the word. Caliphate bad dag. A discussion marked by reasoning civilly on both sides. Imagine Timothy said that we are all in a dark house and someone throws a precious pearl in the midst of a pile of ordinary stones. Everyone scrabbles for the pearl and some think they found it, but nobody can be sure until the day breaks. In the same way, he said that the pearl of true faith and wisdom had fallen into the darkness of this transitory world. Each faith believed that it alone had found the pearl, yet all could claim and all the calf could say in response was that some faith thought they had enough evidence to prove that they were indeed holding the real pearl, but the final truth will not be known in this world. So I really want to get to the main part. This is so long. Once again, there is a precious pearl, but only one precious pearl. Under the narrative, the dawn and light will expose the stones for what they are. Their statement, no less than parable, is ridiculed with conceptual problems from understands how it made a powerful appeal in its day and continues to resonate with many readers in our postmodern world. Still, even for releasing parable is ridiculed with conceptual problems, one understands how it made a powerful appeal in this day and continues to resonate with many readers in our postmodern world. In one respect, however, releasing a parable is not very contemporary. Both merely seeing thought that there is objective truth out there. After all, there is at least one magic ring. I don't want to talk about magic rings. In other words, so I want to get to the point. Is this number 1 or 2? I don't understand this. But their rationals and secular presumptions drove them to infer, at least in some domains, the truth is not accessible. One can think that something or other is true and argue the case, but if one cannot prove that this something is true in a manner that conforms to the verification standards of public science, the wisest stance is beyond tolerance. In other words, the older view of tolerance held either that truth is objective and can be known, and that the best way to uncover it is bold tolerance of those who disagree, since sooner or later the truth will win out, or that while truth can be known in some domains, it probably cannot be known in other domains, and that the wisest and least malignant, of course, in such cases, in being tolerant grounded in a superior knowledge that recognizes our limitations. By contrast, the new tolerance argues that there is no one's view that is exclusively true. Strong opinions are nothing more than strong appearances for a particular version of reality. Each person equally is true. Lessing wanting people to be tolerant because, according to him, we cannot be sure which ring is the magic one. But he did not deny that there is a magic ring. The approach to tolerance argues that all the rings are equally magic. That means that the reason for being tolerant is not that we cannot know which ring is magic, nor that this is the best way to find out which ring is magic, but rather that since all the rings are equally magic or not magic. And this is the introduction. So maybe I can just skip it. I don't want to talk about magics. First, so the old tolerance and the new above has limits. The old tolerance is happily allow, say, Islam is to be preached in a Western country that is mainly Muslim. It may go so far as to allow Islam to be preached, or even while it detests the message. But obviously, it will not allow militant Muslims to blow up people in buildings, and there will be repercussions, and the violence will not be tolerated. In due course, those who advocate such violence actions may also find their freedom to speak curtailed. Again, the old tolerance will allow those who advocate, I don't know that word, to propagate their views, even though most of those who defend the old tolerance think euthanasia is morally wrong. As long as laws about EUTHANASIA stand on the books. However, they will persecute those who practice it. They may even persecute those who conspire to commit. I don't know that word, it's ridiculous. But we're worried about any religion that thinks it has some sort of exclusive path to salvation. And will certainly be opposed to any religion that advocates bombing its opponents. Both the old tolerance and the new tolerance may actually share some limits, and both, for instance, may tolerate the defense of homosexuality, though perhaps more in the first group will dislike what is being defended, while more in the second group will think homosexuality is harmless and may be a good thing. And both may even tolerate the adversity, but not the practice of pedophilia, because it judges the practice to be wrong. In other words, most in both camps will draw the line at the actual practice of pedophilia, or at this depredation of pedophilia pornographically, and not least because of the damage it does. So both the old tolerance and the new were used to speak there of the persons who falsely cries fire in a crowded theater as an example of where freedom of speech must be limited, where tolerance must not prevail. By and large, and however, they do not think of tolerance in quite the same way as we have seen, and very often they do not draw the limits of tolerance, however, understood in quite the same place. More importantly, engaged insight referred to above is right. The old tolerance draws its limits on the basis of substantive arguments about the truth, goodness, doing harm, and protecting society and its victims, while the new tolerance draws its limits on the basis of what it judges to be intolerant, which has become the supreme rights advocates of the new tolerance often find no more scathing effect to hear at those with whom they disagree than intolerant in related categories, bigot, narrow-minded, ignorant, and so forth. Advocates of the old tolerance rarely charge their opponents with intolerance, although that is exactly what this book is doing. Rather, their ethics are shaped by their perception of the evil that cannot be tolerated. So defenders of euthanasia are committing murder, suicide bombers, or terrorists, and so forth. The fact that the new tolerance is most prone to label all of its opponents intolerant leads to a second reflection. The charge of intolerance has come to the wild enormous power in much of the Western culture, at least, as much as the charge of communists during the McCarthy years. It functions as a defeater belief. A defeater belief is a belief that defeats other beliefs. If you hold a defeater belief to be true, whether it's true or not, it is irrelevant. Irrelevant. You cannot possibly hold certain other beliefs to be true. The defeater belief rules certain other beliefs out of court and thus defeats them. For instance, if you believe that there is no one way to salvation and that those who think there is only one way to salvation are ignorant and intolerant, then voices that insist Islam is the only way or that Jesus is the only way will not be credible to you. You will dismiss their beliefs as ignorant and intolerant, nicely defeated by your own beliefs that there cannot possibly be only one way to salvation. Your beliefs has defeated theirs. So if a Christian articulates a well thought out opposition of who Jesus is and what he has done, including how his cross and resurrection constitute the only way by which human beings can be reconciled to God, the person who holds the defeater belief I described may listen with some intellectual interest, but really dismiss everything you say without much thought. Put together several such defeater beliefs and make them widely popular, and you have created an impossibly structured opposing belief or thought so impossible as to be sacredly worth listening to, and let alone compelling or convincing. Put these last two reflections together, and the scope of the challenge becomes daunting and alarming. The new tolerance tends to avoid serious engagement over difficult moral issues, analyzing almost every issue on that one as tolerant, intolerant, including all others from the pantheon of the virtues. The virtues who do not align with this axis. Perhaps the saddest blind spot of all of this stance is the failure to recognize just how culturally driven this particular defeater belief is. For instance, in the Middle East, almost no one holds to the belief that all religions are of equal value. With few dispute the postulate that there is only one way. What that way is, of course, is disputed advocates of the new tolerance are inclined to look down on the assorted cultures of the Middle East, holding that if the people in that region were all as tolerant as the advocates of the new tolerance, themselves peace would reign and trumpet. Meanwhile, many students of the Middle East view the advocates of the new tolerance as epic people who hold nothing precious but material possessions, who cannot think deeply about right and wrong, about truth and error, let alone about God. Too few on both sides ponder how one might build a culture in which people may strongly disagree with one another over fundamentals and still tolerate the opponents because they are human beings in the image of God. Don't mind that the noise in the background. It's the people next door. That's how close they are to me. It's like they're always in the room I'm reading. It's so weird. There's a lot of nosy people around here. Like, they don't know how to mind their business. Some people just need to mind their business. Like, for granted that both the old tolerance and the new set limits to tolerance. Not for a moment. I'm not suggesting that the old tolerance always got things right while the new tolerance always gets things wrong. I'm old enough to remember when in many parts of this country, African Americans could not sit in the front of the bus. It was not tolerated. If arguably we are so politically correct today that we worry beyond reason about offending anyone, developing endless circumculcations, hearing impaired, I don't care about offending people. Like, if they feel offended, so what? Observe that words like chick speak, whatever that words are, have been thinned out. Prejudice never entirely disappears, of course, and we are wise to heed ongoing warnings against it. Now, however, the warnings against such stereotype of prejudice are delivered with such massive consolation and across so many arenas that new forms of prejudice sprouting up like dandelions in a wild field. It is what James Coblett nicely calls incorporeal tolerance. Here's the problem as far as I'm concerned. Over the years, as we became less close-minded and more tolerant of all the right things like civil rights, somehow we became indiscriminately tolerant. You're so judgmental became a major legal put down in anything goes America, as if being judgmental of crap in the culture is a bad thing. Before probing these matters more deeply, it is worth reminding yourself how widespread the problem is. It doesn't take much tarring on the internet to uncover remarkable awful statements from the religious right. You say you're supposed to be nice to the Elizabethans and the Presbyterians and the Methodists and this and that and the other thing nonsense. I don't have to be nice to the spirit of the Antichrist. I can love the people who hold false opinions, but I don't have to be nice to them. I want you to just let me. I just want you to just let a wave of a tolerance wash over you. I want you to let a wave of hatred wash over you. Yes, hate is good. Our goal as a Christian nation. We have a biblical duty. We are called by God to conquer this country. We don't want equal time. We don't want pluralism. If this is one's only exposure to Christianity, one might easily develop a fair bit of sympathy for those on the left who find Christianity to be intolerant. If Christians insiders were trying to read these two quotes as inhabitable as possible, they might point out that there is a species of Christian scholarship that thinks Christian love seeks the other person's good in some sort of a resolute fashion without any necessary emotional component. You can love some nasty pervert, they might say, while emotionally hate in their guts. That clause, hate is good, has a certain rationale to it, and there is a biblical mandate to hate what is evil. Yet Christians at their best have known how to put together a revolution of good godliness with transparent love for people who are enemies, not least because they follow a master who cried out in agony as he writhed on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they not know what they're doing. Luke chapter 23, verse 44. If Christians speak of conquering a country by powerful evangelism, that is one thing. If they give the impression that they are going to oppose their will on a nation by force of arms or even by force of numbers, they are forgetting the distinct nations the Bible itself makes between Christ and Caesar, between the church and the world, between legitimate expectations of what they think should take place now and what they hope will take place in the future. Worse, they also have an amazingly thin ear about how they are going to be heard outside their own circles. Yet, without justifying a moment, much of this reherent Christians who take these stances do so because they think the issue are of such importance they are worth contending for. Most who respond to them do not engage with the issues the Christians want to raise, but simply outflank them by dismissing their intolerance with equal or greater intolerance. As far back as 1991, the criminal journalist Lance Morelli opened his essay in Time magazine cover story Nation a finger pointers with the following paragraph. The busybody and crybaby are getting to be most conspicuous children on the American playground. The busybody is the bully with the elevated shine in his eyes. Gallia Courteous who brave, I don't know these words, barges around telling the other kids that they cannot smoke, be fat, drink booze, wear furs, eat meat, or otherwise, and not conform to the new tribal rules now taking shape. The crybaby, on the other hand, is abject metapoda, little devil with the lawyer, and so to speak, the actionable, the rush, the diaper rush. He is the mayor of Washington arrested and captured on the videotape as he smokes crack in a hotel room with a woman, not his wife. And he pronounces himself a victim of the woman of white injustice of the universe, whatever. Both these types, the one overactive and the other passive, other fashion some old, new malformations of American character. The busybodies, yeah, right. The nosy people. Had begun to affect the American society with a nasty intolerance, a zeal to police the private lives of others and hammer them into standard forms and freedom terms. The busybodies might be the superego of the American personality, the overbearing words. The crybabies are the messy idea, all blubbering, neat, and virtually infantile, irresponsible ability. Add to this insightful and humanist analysis that the fact that both the busybodies and the crybabies are accusing their opposite numbers of intolerance and morals, peace remains a penetrating dispose of many of the polarizations and courtesy ravage. Public discourse irony is injected into the debate. However, when the intolerance of the busybodies grounded in their own minds, in their own tolerance, what Herbert Master called oppressive tolerance. What I propose to do in this chapter is commonly some of the evidence from the past decade or so, beginning with a miscellany of examples and then focusing more pointedly on examples in the domains of education, media, and sexual identity. There's too much noise. If they can make that much noise and I can blast my music, like, it shouldn't even matter. What I propose to do chapter is covering some of the evidence from the past decade or so, beginning with a miscellany of examples, and then focusing more pointedly on examples in domains of education, media, and sexual identity, and then with some observations on how much of this tolerance is fixated on opposing Christianity. So it's why I have to move, because I can't deal with living here. It's like so much stuff. So annoying. In 2005, Copper Bank, based in Manchester, England, asked a Christian organization, Christian Voice, to close its account at the bank because its views were incapable with the posting of the the bank, the public statement of the bank reads as follows. It has come to the bank attention that Christian race is engaged in discriminatory pronouncements based on the grounds of sexual orientation. This public stance is incapable with the pushing of the cooperating bank, which publicly supports diversity and dignity in all its forms in our staff, customers, and other stakeholders. Thus, in the name of supporting diversity, the bank eliminates one of its diverse customers. Even here, it cannot be consistent. The bank doubtless has Muslim customers who are no less willing than Christian voice to condemn homosexual practice. After the BBC News report of the story was released, the bank further stated, "We accept that everyone has the right to freedom of thought on religion. However, we do not believe that this entitles people to actively encourage and practice discrimination. Apparently, the bank thinks private religious thoughts are acceptable provided you do not act on them, which of course instantly trivializes religious belief. And meanwhile, the word demonstration takes on a fearful power of intolerance without any rational reflection on the fact that most human beings discriminate a dozen times a day. An entire culture is awash in discrimination. We do not hire pedophiles as school principals. We do not appoint a fictional illiterate head of NASA, and so forth. Indeed, the bank itself has, of course, discriminated against Christian race. The issue ought to be whether any particular act of discrimination is good, sensible, and proper, for there are both good and evil forms of discrimination. But instead of engaging with the issue in the case of homosexuality, Christian race had come to the attention of the bank because it had publicly condemned the plans to broadcast Jerry Springer and the opera describing it as blasphemous. The co-opera reading the bank discriminated against Christian race on the grounds that the Christian race demonstrated against homosexuals. In the autumn of 2007, Donald Henley, a sociology professor at the Brandeis University lecturer on Latin American politics, told his students that Mexican immigrants to the U.S. used to be called wetbacks. The bare fact cannot be contested. In fact, when in 1954, the Eisenhower administration attempted to eradicate more than 8 million illegal Mexicans, the official name of the project was Operation Wetback. In today's environment, however, a student complained in the kerfuffle that followed. Two students apparently said that Henley's remarks were more than an explanation of a historical fact. At the time, Professor Henley had been lecturing for the 8 years with no previous recorded complaint. After prolonged administrative to enrolling, the university found Henley to be guilty of ethical harassment and imposed a classroom monitor on him to ensure his speech was never out of line, all without granting him a formal hearing or putting the charges in writing before reaching the verdict. Unwilling to be labeled guilty of such harassment, Henley was fought back as of early 2010. The case had not been resolved, but had heated discussion has brought relations between the faculty administration to a tense standoff and prompt fire. Foundation for Individual Rights in Education to be put Brandeis University on its list as one of the worst abusers of liberty on campus. In the medical field, it is hard to remember that a few decades ago, doctors took the Hippocratic Oath, which includes epic clauses against taking life, understood to forbid both abortion and assisted suicide. Since then, almost all medical schools have dropped the Hippocratic Oath, or at least very least offending clauses. The story, however, does not end there. Doctors, nurses, and other medical professionals who still want to live under the constraints of the Hippocratic Oath because of belief that prevent them from performing or participating in what are now legal but still ethically controversial acts, find themselves in a strange situation. More and more pressure is being exerted on them, either to act in violation of their conscience, to abandon medicine until recently conscious clauses protect these medical professionals, permitting them to opt out of medical procedures contrary to their conscience. And now, however, various legalization proposals are attempting to eliminate such a conscience clauses. Medical professionals who judge, say, abortion and assisted suicide to be immoral would have to violate their consciences or to leave the profession. The most strict racists declare that doctors, pharmacists, nurses, and the rest must put patients right first. If they foresee that they could be prominent for them, they should choose another profession, thus in the name of more tolerance for patients' rights. The rights of doctors and other medical professionals would be curtailed. Even though those patients could always go to another doctor, and even though a bear for decades ago, all doctors had to abide by the very ethic that the new tolerance wants to make illegal. If present trends, the procedure at the center of this debate will go on beyond abortion assisted suicide. It is not unthinkable that medical practice will accommodate eugenic infanticide already openly practiced in the leaders Netherlands, and harvesting organs from patients with casophilic conjunctiva impairment long advocated in other new medical journals. It is still uncertain how these matters will play out in court decisions. And my point is that the drive to enhance tolerance for diverse patients and their rights is stridently promoting tolerance to medical professionals. The rising number of Muslims in England have prompted substitute and not suitable eviction of pigs. In their stories, in some schools, the story of the 3 little pigs is now banned as Muslim school children might be offended by stories about unclean animals. The trend reached its silliest moment when the Council of Duly Worcester West Midlands banned all images or representations of pigs from its benefits. The department on the ground that Muslims coming in for benefit may be offended. Calendar of pigs, porcine figures, even pig-shaped stress relievers, and spongy things you squeeze in your hand to relieve stress all had to go, including a tissue box displaying Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. All this in a part of the country that tragically has grown a lot of pigs. When pressed as to why pigs have to go, Maher Robin, a Muslim cobbler in the West Midlands, explained, "It's a tolerance of people's beliefs studying double speak what about tolerance of those who think differently about pigs." In the name of tolerance toward the belief of Muslims, tolerance is opposed. In this instance, as the one media outlet has put it, tolerance has on the lips of Malibu Ramen, and in the decisions of the Duly Council become confused with Islamic supremacy. No one could doubt what Muslims ought to be free to express their dislike of pigs and pig representations. The problem, rather, is that Mr. Rahman thinks that getting rid of pigs and pig representations is a moral obligation as opposed to the virtue of tolerance. Whereas he sentenced himself under no obligation to uphold the virtue of tolerance and permit those who rather like pigs in their representations to keep them. Multiply this sort of confrontation as 100 times and throw in a small but significant number of Renorious jihadists immense in one understands why Prime Minister Cameron is at the least raising some questions about how British immigration policy should be reviewed, not least to preserve a fundamentally tolerant in the first sense culture. Or visit the website of the Harvard chaplains. Not all religious groups join the United Ministry organized by the Harvard chaplains. So the chaplains feel it's necessary to warn against certain destructive religious groups who are not part of the United Ministry. The chaplains are committed to mutual respect and non-protestation. I don't know how to say that. We affirm the rules of personal freedom, doubt, and open critical reflection and healthy spiritual growth. And we're here to help you have a healthy, happy experience of your own spiritual journey while you're here at Harvard. I wonder if they think that's why Jesus came to help us have a healthy, happy experience on our own spiritual journey. And meanwhile, the chaplains warn against, among other things, those who claim a special relationship to God especially anything that qualifies as ego destruction, mind control, and manipulation of a member's relationship with family and friends. On the editorial page of the New York Times for 24 November 2004, Nicholas D. Kristoff writes a stinging attack on the Left Behind series written by Tim Leahy and Dre Jenkins on the ground that these novels enthusiastically dispute Jesus' return to slaughter ever. Everyone who is not a born-again Christian Christos accepts that Mr. Jenkins and Mr. Leahy are sincere, but then again, so are Muslim fundamentalists. He adds, now, I often written that blue staters should be less snooty toward fundamentalist Christians, and I realize that this column will seem pretty snooty, but if I praise the good work of evangelicals, like their superhero relief efforts in Dorfer, I also condemn what I perceive as bigotry. One then goes on to talk about the money the series is earning and pondering the motives of the authors while poking fun, with not a justification at previous efforts in date settling. I suppose it is too much to hope that Kirchhoff would distinguish between divergent Christian understandings of what takes place at the end. So, Christians who do not accept all the interpretations advanced by Leahy and Jenkins, however, cannot hide behind these divergences, for the Bible itself not only mandates Christians to relate suffering as the kind of service and for to which Christoph alludes, but also contains a broad swath of exclusivism, in which judgment by God is finally poured out on unbelievers. Christoph, however, does not wrestle with how such teachings in the Bible may be integrated with everyone else the Bible says, or with whether what it says might be true, or how every pushing, including his own, is making a truth claim that excludes other truth claims. He simply condemns what he does not like as bigotry. So Michael Hublack is one of France's most respected, if least comfortable contemporary writers, with a chef of literary awards to his credit. His tone is that of a younger Albert Camus. In 2002, he was taken to court for leading Muslim bodies in France. The charge was making a racial assault and inciting religious hatred. This aroused because in a magazine interview he made some derogatory comments about Islam. He dismissed Islam as the dumbest religion and unfavorably compared the Quran with the Bible. In the former, he said, it's poorly written, while the Bible, at least, is beautifully written because the Jews have a heck of a literary talent. In a court case that followed, several prominent French intelligence defended Hausler, but not a few sided with his accusers. The fluently writes, legal accused him of Islamophobia. How do you say that? Islamophobia. Many leftist writers insisted he was so vulgar and he was not worth defending. But perhaps the most astute comments came from Salam. It's 1:46 now. Let's see how much time. Restaurant who knows something of what it means to arouse Islamic right in the Guardian. But if individual in a free society no longer has the right to say openly that he prefers one book to another, then that society no longer has the right to call itself free. Pomsey, any Muslim who said that the Quran has much better than the Bible was. If somebody said, if a Muslim who said that the Quran has much better than the Bible would then also be guilty of an assault and absurdly would rule. Hold on, I have to use the restrooms. Okay, ready? So I suppose it's too much hope that I don't know where Christoph, however, does not wrestle with how such teachings in the Bible might be integrated with everything else the Bible says, or with whether what it says might be true, or however every portion, including his own, is making a truth claim that includes other truth claims, and he simply condemns what he does not like as bigotry. But if an individual in a free society no longer has the right to say openly that he prefers one book to another, then that society no longer has the right to call itself free. Presumably, any Muslim who said the Quran was much better than the Bible would then also be guilty of an assault and absurdly would rule as to the dumbest religion while it's a point of view. And how did they encounter court made the simple, but it's just no point that to attack people's ideologies or belief systems is not to attack the people themselves. This is surely one of the foundation principles of an open society. Citizens have the right to complain about discrimination against themselves, but not about distant, even strongly worded, implied distant from their thoughts. There cannot be fences erected around ideas, philosophies, attitudes, or beliefs. Mercifully, the French court found in favor of the defendant. I don't know why they're standing at the same spot. It's 1:55 now. In 2006, the one assembled of the Henry M. Jackson High School in Mill Creek, Washington, in line with its tradition of choosing in a piece of music to play at graduation, wrote in anonymously for friends, people at Maria, are so suspicious. About Maria, like, what is over here that they want? Like, I'm reading, like, is there something wrong with me reading the book? Is there something wrong with me reading the Bible? No, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm, like, free in my own apartment. Like, why are you watching me for? Like, I don't get it. In 2006, the wing assembled of the Henry M. Jackson High School in Mill Creek, Washington, in line with its tradition of choosing a piece of music to play at graduation, wrote in anonymously for Fran Brios Avian Maria. The ensemble had played it for the winter concert and wanted to play it for graduation as well. The district career Kara Whitehead turned it down winter's concert with one thing, but to play the piece at graduation might be constructed as in religion. One student covering the institute and insisting that some people They like to make it their business to be nosy, and maybe like the person acts some type of way. Like, you shouldn't be like quick to judge somebody just because they act a certain way. I don't know. I don't act a certain way. I'm just quiet, introverted, and there's nothing wrong with that. If I'm not breaking the law, I'm not harassing neighbors. I'm like minding my business every single day. I don't bother you. Like, there's nothing over here for you. Like, so I don't know why you're always watching me. You just want to find stuff out that you're not going to find out. Because I don't believe that people should like invade other people's privacy and trying to invade unless the person tells you something about that person. And then it's okay, but not just to like listen to that person trying to find out stuff like you don't have no business. Like, that's called like undercover stalking. Eavesdropping. There's a lot of that goes on in apartments. I'm not the poor. I'm not paranoid. It's what happens. I'm telling you the truth. You have to be careful about your surroundings, and when you see something suspicious, you gotta be alert. But in 2006, the one example of the Henry M. Jackson High School in Mill Creek, Washington, in line with the tradition of choosing a piece of music to place. They probably get offended too because my sticker says on the door, it says mind your business, and people be getting in their feelings like, well, I'm gonna like eavesdrop on her anyway, so they make her some type of way, like, because I don't like the way she said. Like, that's how it is. And then we see for France, Beebles, Admiras, and Sable have place for their winter concert and wanted to play it for graduation as well in the district. Superintendent Kara Whitehood turned it down. Winter concerts were one thing, but to play the piece at graduation might be constructed as endorsing religion. And one student, Catherine Muir, sued and insisting that her constitutional rights had been violated. To read the letters to the editor of the Seattle Times to gain an education on how tolerance so easily becomes intolerance. One writer applauded Whitehead for her decision for correctly insisting that the wind and Zabel play a more secular piece for Kasutman after all. The melody is very familiar to all of us. One suspects the writer is thinking of a different piece with the same title, but we are let that pass, and when we hear the students play, the words are immediately heard. In our brains, as Jay Norwood comments now, we are individually a false crime, and we may not be singing about God, and we may not be hearing words about God, but the notes make us think of God, which is revolting at graduation. In Nera and Wyatt, the federal district court in Seattle ruled against the student. The case was appealed to the North Circuit Court of Appeals, which upheld the ruling against the student. On 22 March 2010, the Supreme Court declined to hear a further appeal, which effectively left standing the decision of the Ninth Circuit against the student. And 4 years after 13 people were shot and killed at the Columbian High School, and the school won its struggle to ban religious messages in its remembrance display. The father of the victim, Daniel Rivera, wanted to include words that reflected his faith in the wake of this moment of tragedy. The school forbade it. The case worked its way up through the courts. The Supreme Court refused to hear it, so the decision of a lower court stands. The school won, and so did intolerance. The resentment display must not include anything that suggests remembrance in ways that this particular family found most meaningful and helpful to them. Enough, I could add many scores of examples, but you get the idea. In the name of not offending anyone, we are in danger of appealing to the virtue of tolerance to become more intolerant. It may be helpful to demonstrate how common this is the particular domains. I'm gonna start reading this for a minute. To take a break. What makes some people so nosy? All of us have to deal with nosy people at some point in our lives. Nosiness is when we don't want to interfere in our lives does so. So unsolicited interference often manifests as questions and comments relating to our personal matters, such as our health, career, and relationships. Think about how you feel when someone pokes their nose into your personal affairs. You feel violated and resentful. Someone who didn't have permission to invade your privacy did so, and these negative feelings motivate you to negativity. Evaluate the nosy person and avoid interacting with them in the future. You're a nice person, but you have this really bad habit of poking your nose into other affairs. Well, way to poke your nose into my affair, of poking my nose into others' affair. The degree to which we share our personal stuff with others depends on how close we are to them. You may have no problem sharing the details of your life with your spouse, friends, siblings, parents, but you feel a random stranger who commented on your weight had no right to do so. Why can't they mind their own business? Don't they have anything to do? We never say these things to people we're close to, even if they pass the exact same comments. It's normal and expected of them to interfere in our lives. But strangers know. Assuming nosy people have got nothing else to do in their lives is unlikely to be true. What more likely is that they have terrible social skills. Why are some people nosy in the first place? Because they want the information from you, about you. Especially if you're a quiet person. They get upset that you're quiet and keep to yourself. When you're a quiet person, they tend not to have emo against you so that they can make up gossip about you of littering to turn people against you. As an introvert, this has been my life. The same reason why I don't trust anyone and never will. I don't know what's going on here. What are they talking about? This is why I live in the country. Maybe they are bored or like you. No. There could also be talking junk. It could be anything. You can always make it known to see them watching, but waving, be watching because their lives are boring and they find interesting. That's not it. I think it's like neighborhood watchdog, crime watch. But why are you watching me? I'm not a criminal crime. I'm just here reading my books every day in my house, minding my business, not hurting anybody. And I'm the one that gets watched. Wow, that's crazy. Maybe it's the quietest people have the juicy information they can find out about. No, my life is not like boring. It is like introverted, laid back, not really worried about making a lot of friends. I just like to chill, stay home. Like, it may seem weird to them because they're in a different mindset than me. Not everybody is supposed to be the same person. We have our own personalities, like how God made us. Contrary to the sin part. If you think about, we are different and God created us all with unique features, personality traits. Give thanks to God because He created you to do great things. You will never accomplish those great things being the same as the world. Do not do what everyone else is doing. Do what God wants you to do. If everyone is living for material things, live for Christ. If everyone else is being rebellious, live in righteousness. If everyone else is in darkness, remain in the light, because Christians are the light of the world. We are created uniquely with different talents, features, and personalities. Romans chapter 12, verse 6 to 8. In His grace, God has given us different gifts for doing certain things well. So if God has given you the ability to prophesy, speak out with as much as faith as God has given you. If your gift is serving others, serve them well. If you are a teacher, teach well. If your gift is to encourage others by encouraging. If it's giving, then give generously. If God has given you leadership ability, take responsibility seriously. And if you have a gift for showing kindness to others, do it gladly. Chapter 1, verse 39, verse 13, verse 14. You made all the inner parts of my body and knit me together in my mother's womb. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. Your orgasm is wondrous. How well I know it. Let's see. Philippines. Let's start the live over.